The Grand Canyon is one of the most breathtaking landscapes on Earth, a vast, silent world carved by time itself. But beneath its beauty lies a darker reality. Every year, hikers step beyond the rim and are never seen again. They vanish from marked trails, disappear within hours of contact, or leave behind neatly packed campsites with no sign of where they went. Search teams find footprints that lead nowhere, equipment that seems carefully placed, and signals that stop without reason. Some cases stretch back decades, others happened only months ago. All share the same haunting outcome: no trace, no explanation, no return. In this series, we follow the stories of those who walked into the canyon and never came back, the clues they left, the theories that surround them, and the questions that still remain. Join us as we uncover the mysterious disappearances hidden deep within the Grand Canyon. The vanishing of Morgan Heimer. The Colorado River curved quietly through the Grand Canyon that June afternoon in 2015. The air shimmered above the sandstone walls. It was the kind of day that seemed endless, the canyon floor reflecting the light in slow motion. Among the guides leading tourists that week was 22-year-old Morgan Heimer. He was experienced, calm, and known for his patience with guests. By evening, he would be gone, leaving behind a mystery as deep as the canyon itself. Morgan had been working with Tour West, a commercial rafting company licensed by the National Park Service. The group, one of the season's guided expeditions, had launched from Lee's Ferry days earlier. On June 2nd, they were several days into the trip, moving through the middle stretch of the canyon. The sun rose pale and sharp, the heat pressing against the water. The group stopped at a familiar point near Pumpkin Springs, a rest area at River Mile 213. It was routine. The guides helped guests set up camp while others swam, photographed the cliffs, or rested under the narrow shade of the rocks. Morgan had been last seen wearing a life jacket, a dark swimsuit, and a light shirt. According to witnesses, he spoke briefly with one of the other guides, helped a guest secure gear, and then walked toward the river. A few minutes later, someone realized he was gone. At first, no one worried. It was easy to vanish for a moment among the rocks, or to step out of sight along the shoreline. But as the minutes stretched, silence filled the gap. The water near Pumpkin Springs runs deep. Its green surface hides sharp drop-offs and sudden currents beneath. When Morgan didn't return after 20 minutes, the guides began to search. They called his name, walked the banks, and checked the boats. His sandals were found nearby, along with his radio. There was no splash, no cry, no sound at all that anyone remembered. The guides notified the National Park Service by satellite phone. By dusk, a search team had been activated. That night, light from headlamps swept the rock walls and narrow beaches. Rangers travelled by boat and helicopter, covering miles up and downstream. The next morning, more personnel arrived. They marked coordinates, created a small command post, and organised sectors along the river. Searchers focused on a stretch extending 2 miles below Pumpkin Springs and 1 mile upstream. The current in that section flows swiftly, winding through eddies and deep pools. They checked rock ledges and river bends where debris often collects. Nothing appeared. For 6 days, the effort grew. Helicopters traced the riverbanks, divers entered the deeper pools, and rangers combed the canyon edges. Each evening brought the same stillness. The canyon's sound at night, a low hum of wind and insects, covered every trace of human noise. Search logs described clear skies, temperatures over 100 degrees, and heat mirages on the rocks. Each day, searchers noted the shifting water levels and turbulence. On June 9th, after a week with no sign, the official search was suspended. The National Park Service's report lists his last known coordinates precisely. Time: 4 p.m. Date: the 2nd of June, 2015. Location: River Mile 213 near Pumpkin Springs. The report notes no evidence of foul play, no witnesses to submersion, and no recovery. In the sterile language of the record, his disappearance occupies a few lines of data. But those who were there remember the stillness differently. One guest said he looked across the water and saw nothing, no movement, no ripples. Another recalled that the air was so dry it distorted vision, turning light into shifting layers. Some thought Morgan might have slipped into the water silently. Others said it was impossible that someone would have seen or heard something. Rangers documented the depth near the spring. At its centre, divers measured over 20 feet of vertical drop before the bottom sloped into dark silt. They mapped submerged ledges, pockets where the current turns inward. The canyon walls narrow slightly there, causing backflow currents that pull objects in circles before releasing them downstream. It is a place where a body could vanish beneath the surface and not reappear for days or never. In interviews with co-workers, investigators asked about his demeanour that morning. All described him as calm, relaxed, and focused. He had spoken about plans for graduate school and travel. There were no indications of distress or fatigue. His journal, recovered from his tent, contained only short notes about daily tasks and water conditions. The last entry, written in small handwriting, simply read, 213 tomorrow. When the search ended, the Park Service issued a formal statement. It said, Morgan Heimer, a 22-year-old male, remains missing in the Grand Canyon. The search has been scaled back to a continuous but limited operation. The phrase continuous but limited meant that rangers would continue to monitor river reports and watch for signs during routine patrols. Weeks passed. Nothing surfaced. Months later, as monsoon season arrived, the currents changed. Rangers expected debris and driftwood to move through the lower canyon. Each storm brought new searches along beaches and eddies. By late autumn, no remains were recovered. His disappearance became another line in the park's list of unresolved incidents. The Grand Canyon has long been both destination and danger. Between 1,920 and 2020, more than 700 people have died within its boundaries, many to falls, dehydration, or drowning. The Colorado River, though often calm on the surface, conceals whirlpools and undercurrents strong enough to trap even strong swimmers. In that environment, even experienced guides are vulnerable to a single misstep. At mile 213, searchers later returned with sonar. They mapped the underwater terrain, noting irregular rock formations and depressions filled with sediment. Some of these pockets were more than 10 feet deep, their shapes formed by centuries of erosion. Divers said visibility dropped to inches within seconds. Any search below the surface was limited to touch and guesswork. Morgan's family visited the site months later. They stood at the overlook near the spring, where the rock glows orange at sunset. The river below moves slowly, turning silver under the light. They spoke with rangers, read the reports, and walked the shoreline where his sandals had been found. The sound of the water was steady, unbroken. To this day, no trace of Morgan has been recovered. His name remains on the Park Service's missing persons list. The coordinates of his last known location are still logged in search records. Every year, the canyon shifts, slightly new sandbars form, old ones vanish, and the river rewrites its edges. The place where he disappeared looks different now. In the archives, the event remains a simple sequence. Guide disappears, search conducted, no result. The entries end there. The canyon keeps its silence. The disappearance of Rebecca Bloxom. Morning rose clear over the Grand Canyon on the 21st of June 2019. The light moved slowly down the cliffs, turning stone from grey to red. At the South Kaibab trailhead, a few early hikers waited for the shuttle. Among them was 53-year-old Rebecca Bloxom. She carried a small pack, a sun hat, and a single bottle of water. She had arrived 2 days earlier from Maryland, staying at Bright Angel Lodge. Her notes found later in her room were brief: walk the rim, descend a little, not too far. She planned a short hike that morning down to Cedar Ridge and back. At 7:30 a.m., she started down the trail. The South Kaibab drops fast through open ridges with no shade. Its path cut sharply into stone. Witnesses described Rebecca as quiet, steady, and polite, often stepping aside to let mule trains pass. A couple from Colorado remembered her walking just ahead of them. She wore tan shorts, a light shirt, and hiking boots. The sun was mild then, the air cool enough to carry sound far down the canyon. By 8:15 a.m., she reached Point, a narrow lookout named for the reaction it draws from first-time visitors. Hikers recalled her standing near the edge, gazing out in silence. One woman said she smiled faintly and said, "It's endless." Rebecca then walked a few yards beyond the viewpoint, turned a corner, and disappeared from sight. That was the last confirmed moment anyone saw her alive. When she failed to check out of her lodge that evening, park staff called rangers. Her car remained parked at the visitor lot. Inside her room were clothes neatly folded, her identification, and a guidebook with several pages marked, including one describing the South Kaibab Trail. The bed was untouched. The report of a missing hiker was logged at 8:43 p.m., and the first search began at dawn. Rangers started from the top, tracing the route from Point to Cedar Ridge. Temperatures rose quickly past 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Helicopters circled above, their sound echoing through the cliffs. Searchers scanned ledges and drainages where hikers sometimes stray for photographs. By noon, a pilot spotted something bright below the trail fabric, caught on brush about 700 feet down. Rangers rappelled to it and found part of a sun hat torn along the brim. Later that day, a water bottle matching hers was discovered farther downslope, resting among loose stones. Faint slide marks led toward a narrow gully. The slope beneath Point is deceptive, a shallow ridge that drops suddenly into unstable gravel. Rangers marked the coordinates, then widened the grid search into the drainage leading toward Pipe Creek. On the second day, a helicopter team spotted another object, a cell phone, lying on a boulder about 200 feet below the previous find. The screen was cracked. Rangers recovered it and noted sand embedded in the edges. The last photo stored was a landscape taken at 8:12 a.m. from Point, showing sunlight reaching across the canyon. There were no calls or messages afterward. Ground crews and technical climbers worked through the next 3 days. They rappelled along cliffs and scanned shaded alcoves for any sign of movement or reflection. Dog teams were deployed from the ridge, but lost scent within minutes. The canyon's winds, changing direction each hour, carried scent away too quickly for tracking to hold. By the 5th day, the operation had grown to more than 40 people. Drones mapped sections unreachable by foot, while rangers examined drainages where debris tends to collect. Midday heat forced breaks. By afternoon, wind gusts grounded aircraft. The team worked until sunset, using ropes to reach ledges below the slide area. There, a final object appeared, wedged in a rock crevice, a small backpack containing energy bars, sunglasses, and a folded paper map. The map showed her route ending at Point. Below that location, cliffs dropped vertically into hundreds of feet of empty air. The ledge where her belongings were found stood above a line of broken limestone that descends toward the canyon floor. Rangers determined that reaching the lower slope was unsafe. They photographed the area by helicopter, but saw no signs of remains or additional gear. After 6 days, the official search was suspended. The National Park Service report summarized the findings in one paragraph. Subject: Bloxom Rebecca. Age 53. Presumed fall from trail near Point. Remains unrecovered. The file listed coordinates for each item times of air missions, and weather notes clear skies, high temperatures, strong afternoon winds. It ended with the words, "Search terminated, continued limited monitoring." Weeks later, monsoon rains swept through the canyon. Flash floods often shift debris hundreds of feet and erase small evidence. When rangers revisited the site in October for a follow-up survey, no new clues were found. The drainage below Uar Point had changed, rocks moved, sand reshaped, vegetation stripped away. The ledge where her backpack was found was partly collapsed. Her family visited later that year. They stood at the overlook, looking toward the same ridge where she had walked. From above, the view is calm. Distant cliffs, light bending across stone, the trail winding downward until it disappears. They met with park staff, read the incident report, and left flowers near the railing. A quiet plaque with her name was placed near the viewpoint months later. It reads only, "She loved the morning light." The case remains classified as inactive, presumed fatal. No remains have ever been recovered. Rangers occasionally mention her name in safety briefings for new seasonal staff. Her disappearance is used as an example of how easily a single misstep or momentary distraction can turn fatal on the Kaibab's narrow ridges. The section of trail below Uar Point remains popular. Hundreds of hikers pass it daily, unaware of what lies beneath the slope. The Park Service has added signs warning of unstable edges and sudden drops, though few read them closely before stepping toward the edge for a photo. From above, the canyon looks solid. Up close, its walls are constantly shifting, stone turning to dust under each season's heat. In her recovered notes, written days before, Rebecca described how the canyon seemed alive in stillness. Her final photograph captures that empty space, layered color, and endless depth. Beneath that same point, the fragments of her belongings still rest among the rocks. The river below continues unseen, carving deeper into the earth, carrying everything that falls toward its silence. The disappearance of Stephen C. The trail that cuts through the inner gorges of the Grand Canyon is older than any map that names it. For centuries, it was a path used by the Havasupai and Hopi, carved by hooves, sandals, and the slow pressure of water. Today it is lined with trail signs and ranger stations, but much of its length remains wild, exposed, and indifferent. It was on this trail, in the spring of 2012, that a man named Stephen C. Johnson stepped into the canyon and was never seen again. Stephen Johnson was 58 years old, a retired electrical engineer from Mesa, Arizona. Friends described him as experienced but cautious in the backcountry. He had hiked dozens of times in the Southwest, including several multi-day treks in the Grand Canyon. In early May 2012, he set out alone from the South Rim, planning a 6-day solo hike along the Tonto Trail and down into the Inner Canyon. His permit indicated he would exit via the Bright Angel Trail on May 13. He carried a standard pack, light food rations, a tent, and 2 liters of water. Rangers noted that he checked in at the Backcountry Information Center before leaving, confirming his route and expected return date. On May 14, when Johnson failed to appear at the trailhead, his daughter reported him missing. The National Park Service initiated a search the following morning, beginning at the points marked on his backcountry permit. Rangers quickly located his vehicle, still parked at the South Rim lot, confirming that he had not exited elsewhere. The weather during those days had been dry and unusually warm for May, with daytime highs in the mid-92 Fahrenheit inside the canyon. Water sources along the Tonto Trail were lower than usual, a condition that could pose a severe risk to a solo hiker. Search teams began by surveying Johnson's planned route, moving first along the South Kaibab Trail and then sweeping westward along the Tonto platform. Helicopters scanned drainages, while ground crews traced dry washes and side canyons. It was on the second day of the search May 16, that they found the first piece of evidence: Johnson's sleeping pad, folded neatly, resting beneath a rock ledge near Cremation Canyon. It appeared undisturbed, as if intentionally placed. Nearby, searchers found a boot print that matched the size and tread of Johnson's hiking boots. But there were no signs of a struggle, no discarded gear, and no tracks leading clearly in any direction. Teams expanded their search radius. They rappelled into side canyons, explored narrow drainages, and used infrared imaging during nighttime flights. Nothing else surfaced. On May 18, a helicopter crew thought they spotted a piece of reflective material near a cliff face in the canyon's eastern section. Ground teams spent a day reaching the location, only to discover it was a scrap of an old emergency blanket too weathered to be linked definitively to Johnson. Witness reports offered little clarity. A group of hikers from Flagstaff recalled speaking briefly with a man who matched Johnson's description on May 10 near the junction of the Tonto and Bright Angel trails. He appeared tired but in good spirits, they said, and mentioned camping near Grapevine Canyon that night. Another group claimed to have seen a lone hiker on a ridge near Zoroaster Temple 2 days later, but distances and times did not align precisely. The terrain itself complicated every assumption. The Tonto Trail is not a single continuous path, but a series of segments that wind along steep slopes, narrow ledges, and sudden drop-offs. A misstep can send a person hundreds of feet into an inaccessible gorge. Flash floods, though rare in May, can sweep through side canyons without warning. Wildlife, including desert bighorn and coyotes, sometimes scatter gear far from where a hiker falls. Every possibility remained open. By May 21, the official search had grown to include more than 60 personnel, including technical rescue teams and dog units flown in from Utah. Canines picked up a faint scent near Grapevine Creek, but quickly lost it as the trail dropped into broken rock and dry wash. Rangers marked the site as a possible rest point, but found no evidence of campfire ash, food packaging, or footprints. On May 23, with no additional leads, the National Park Service scaled back the operation. The official report listed Johnson as missing and presumed deceased, a designation that reflected the harsh reality of the canyon. In interviews, rangers emphasized that even experienced hikers can be undone by dehydration, disorientation, or a single misstep. The Grand Canyon's terrain, they noted, swallows evidence, quickly wind covers footprints, flash floods scatter debris, and heat breaks down organic material within days. Over the years that followed, volunteer searchers and independent hiking groups continued to comb the region. Some used drones to scan inaccessible ledges, others explored sinkholes and abandoned miners' trails that branch off from the Tonto. In 2015, a group from the Arizona Hiking Club found a torn section of nylon fabric, wedged in a crevice near Grapevine Canyon. It was never conclusively linked to Johnson. Another team, searching in 2018, reported spotting what they believed to be a boot sole far down a vertical drop. Park authorities attempted a technical descent but found nothing. Johnson's family visited the park each spring for several years after his disappearance. They would hike the South Kaibab Trail as far as Skeleton Point and leave a small cairn near the overlook, marked with a metal tag bearing his initials. His daughter, in an interview with the Arizona Republic in 2016, said, "He loved this place more than anywhere else on Earth. If he's here, then he's where he wanted to be." Today, Johnson's case remains one of the most baffling in Grand Canyon history. Despite an extensive search, no remains, clothing, or identifiable gear have ever been recovered. Rangers reviewing the incident note that of the hundreds of missing person cases recorded in the park's history, many are eventually solved, but a small number, like Johnson's, remain unsolved for decades. They exist as names in ranger logs, their stories reduced to coordinates, weather reports, and a final known location. The trail where Johnson vanished is still used by hikers every season. Most pass through without incident, following the switchbacks and water caches with careful attention. Yet, at a certain bend near Grapevine Canyon, where the path narrows and the land drops into silence, many pause and look down. Somewhere below, perhaps scattered among the limestone and juniper, lies the end of a journey no one ever witnessed. The strange case of Victor Satler. The north rim of the Grand Canyon is quieter than the south. Fewer roads, fewer crowds, longer distances between trailheads. It is a place where the silence stretches for miles and the landscape seems unchanged for centuries. In June 2014, that silence deepened when a man named Victor Satler stepped onto one of those remote trails and never came back. Satler was 57 years old, a retired mechanical engineer from Clovis, California. Friends described him as practical, reserved, and deeply fond of the outdoors. He had hiked in the Sierra Nevada and the desert southwest for years, and he often planned solo trips to national parks as a way to clear his mind. In late May, he drove from California to northern Arizona, telling friends he planned to spend a week exploring the North Rim. On the 10th of June 2014, he parked his silver sedan at the Point Imperial trailhead, a scenic overlook more than 8,800 feet above sea level. From there, he intended to take a routine day hike along the Ken Patrick Trail, a moderate path that winds through pinyon forest and open meadows before skirting the rim of the canyon. He signed the trail register around 8:30 a.m. and told another hiker he expected to be back by mid-afternoon. The weather was clear, the temperature mild, and conditions ideal for hiking. Nothing suggested trouble. When Satler's car was still parked at Point Imperial that evening, rangers assumed he had extended his hike and might return by nightfall. When it remained there the next morning, they launched a search. The first day's effort focused on the trail itself. Rangers followed the Ken Patrick path for miles, scanning side trails, drainages, and rim overlooks. They found no footprints, no water bottles, no scraps of clothing. Satler had left no sign of his passage beyond the entry in the trail register. By June 12, the search expanded. Crews moved west towards the Cape Royal Road and down into side canyons branching from the rim. Helicopters flew along the canyon edge, using thermal imaging to detect any heat signature. Search dogs were brought in and followed a faint scent for roughly half a mile before losing it near a dry creek bed. Teams spent hours combing the area on foot, calling Satler's name into the wind, but the scent trail ended abruptly. The terrain complicated everything. The Ken Patrick Trail is not technically difficult, but much of it crosses uneven ground, dotted with limestone outcrops and thick brush. Off-trail areas can drop suddenly into steep ravines or thickets dense enough to hide a person from view just a few feet away. Even a short detour from the main path can lead into terrain that is nearly impossible to traverse without ropes or climbing gear. Rangers interviewed hikers who had been on the trail that day. 2 recalled passing a man who matched Satler's description near the halfway point around noon. He appeared calm and was carrying a small day pack. Another group said they saw someone about an hour later, resting at a viewpoint near a stand of junipers. They assumed he was heading back toward the trailhead. These were the last confirmed sightings. On June 13, search teams widened their perimeter, moving into remote drainages below the rim. Some of these areas were accessible only by rappel. Crews explored shallow caves and overhangs, checked dry washes for signs of a fall, and used drones to scan inaccessible slopes. Nothing was found. By the 5th day, the official search effort had grown to include more than 60 people, along with helicopters, fixed-wing aircraft, and technical rescue specialists. One puzzling detail emerged on June 14. A water bottle and a lightweight jacket, similar to the kind Satler was known to carry, were found near a steep ravine about 2 miles from the trail. They were not conclusively identified as his, but their placement suggested someone had moved off the main path. Rangers lowered a team into the ravine, but the descent ended in a narrow chute that was too dangerous to navigate further. They returned empty-handed. Theories multiplied as the search stretched into a second week. One was that Satler had slipped while exploring near the rim and fallen into a section of canyon too deep and rugged to search effectively. Another suggested he had become disoriented and attempted to bushwhack back to the trailhead, only to succumb to dehydration or exposure. Some speculated he might have left the trail intentionally, either to explore an unmarked route or for reasons unknown, but there was no evidence to support any single explanation. By June 18, more than 100 square miles had been searched, and resources were stretched thin. Rangers scaled back the operation, shifting from active search to limited monitoring. The official report listed Satler as missing and presumed deceased. His vehicle was removed from the trailhead and impounded. The case did not end there. In the summer of 2015, a private volunteer team returned to the area with drones and high-resolution cameras. They scanned ledges and ravines that had been inaccessible the year before. In one aerial image, they spotted what appeared to be a section of fabric tangled in a scrub oak tree far below the rim. A technical team attempted a descent, but shifting rock and unstable ground forced them to abandon the effort. The object was never recovered or conclusively identified. Satler's family continued to visit the canyon in the years after his disappearance. They placed a small plaque at Point Imperial, inscribed with a single sentence: "He walked into the wild and did not return." In interviews, they described him as meticulous and careful, unlikely to have taken unnecessary risks. His sister told a local newspaper in 2016, "He loved the canyon, but he respected it. That's why this is so hard to understand." The Park Service still lists Satler's case among its active cold files. Rangers reviewing the incident have noted how little evidence there is: no remains, no confirmed gear, not even a trail of footprints beyond the first mile. In a place as vast and unforgiving as the Grand Canyon, they say that absence is not unusual. The canyon's scale swallows traces quickly, and many disappearances, even decades old, remain unresolved. Hikers still pass along the Ken Patrick Trail every season. Most return without incident, pausing at overlooks and taking photographs of the canyon stretching endlessly below. But at one bend in the trail, near a clearing of junipers where a man was last seen resting on a mild June afternoon, some stop and linger. It is a quiet place where the wind moves through the trees and the rim drops away into silence, the last known point on a path that simply ends. The unfinished trek of Peter Anderson. The Tanner Trail is one of the Grand Canyon's oldest routes, a steep, sun-exposed descent carved by ancestral Puebloan travelers centuries before modern maps were drawn. It winds from the south rim down through layers of sandstone and shale toward the Colorado River, its switchbacks slicing through desert scrub and scattered juniper. It is a trail that rewards preparation and punishes complacency. In September 2017, a man named Peter Anderson set out on that path alone. He never returned. Anderson was 54 years old, a freelance photographer from Santa Fe, New Mexico. His work focused on the landscapes of the American Southwest: vast skies, weathered rock, the play of light across empty space. He often hiked solo to capture images that could only be found miles from the nearest road. In early September, he applied for a backcountry permit for a 4-day trek that would take him from Lippin Point down the Tanner Trail to the Colorado River, with planned campsites near Tanner Rapids and Escalante Creek. His itinerary indicated he would return to the South Rim on September 14. He arrived at Grand Canyon National Park on the morning of September 11. Rangers later confirmed he checked in at the Backcountry Information Center, reviewed trail conditions, and purchased additional water purification tablets at the visitor store. That afternoon, he parked his dark blue Subaru Outback at the Lippin Point overlook. Inside were a cooler, a small tent, and a stack of camera equipment he did not plan to carry. A handwritten note on the dashboard listed his intended route and expected return time. Weather conditions were typical for early autumn clear skies, highs in the upper 80 seconds Fahrenheit on the rim, and over 100 degrees in the inner canyon. Water levels along the Colorado were low, and reliable sources along the Tanner route were limited to the river itself and a few seasonal seeps. Rangers later noted that Anderson carried about 3 litres of water, a 45-litre pack, a lightweight tent, and a Canon camera with 2 lenses. His gear list, recorded on his permit application, suggested he planned for moderate backcountry travel, not a prolonged stay. The first 2 days of the hike passed without incident. 2 hikers descending Tanner Trail on September 12 reported seeing a man matching Anderson's description about 2 miles below the rim. He was moving steadily and appeared in good condition. Another pair of backpackers camping near Escalante Creek said they saw him on September 13 inches the late afternoon, resting on a boulder and photographing the canyon walls as the sun dropped low. They spoke briefly. He told them he planned to camp near the river that night and hike out the next day. That was the last confirmed sighting. When Anderson did not return to his vehicle by September 15, park rangers initiated a standard overdue hiker response. A ranger patrol checked the Tanner Trail that afternoon, but found no sign of recent travel. The following morning, a full search began. Helicopters flew low along the trail corridor, scanning switchbacks, ledges, and dry washes. Ground teams descended from the rim, while others approached from river level, moving upriver from Tanner Rapids. On the second day of the search, crews discovered Anderson's camera tripod about 5 miles from the trailhead, propped against a rock near a steep drop-off. The ground around it showed no signs of a fall, no disturbed soil or broken brush. A few hundred yards away, a single trekking pole lay in the dust. No footprints led away from the area. The items were carefully logged, photographed, and collected, but they offered no clues about where Anderson had gone. Teams focused their efforts on the lower sections of the trail and the river corridor. They checked established campsites along the Colorado, searched side canyons for evidence of shelter, and inspected the banks for signs that someone might have attempted a water crossing. Rangers interviewed rafters and anglers who had been on the river that week. None reported seeing a solo hiker. A break came on September 18 when a helicopter crew spotted a camera bag wedged between rocks on a ledge near the confluence of Tanner Canyon and the Colorado River. Inside were 2 lenses, a partially full memory card, and a small notebook. The most recent photo timestamp was September 13 at 5:42 p.m. It showed a view of the canyon taken from a vantage point about 200 feet above the river. Searchers rappelled into the area, but the ledge ended abruptly in a vertical drop. Below, a talus slope descended into a jumble of boulders and sand. If Anderson had fallen there, the impact would have been severe. The search expanded beyond the Tanner corridor. Teams followed potential off-trail routes Anderson might have taken for photography: narrow ridgelines, exposed viewpoints, faint game trails leading to overlooks. They rappelled into inaccessible drainages and used drones to scan shaded alcoves and crevices. Despite nearly 2 weeks of effort, no further evidence was found. The official search was suspended on September 24. Rangers issued a statement calling the disappearance unresolved with unknown circumstances. They noted the possibility of a fall near the river, but acknowledged the lack of conclusive evidence. In the months that followed, small volunteer groups returned to the area on their own. Some explored sections of cliff face that had been too dangerous to reach during the official search. Others floated the Colorado, scanning eddies and shorelines for signs of remains. Nothing surfaced. Anderson's family visited the park the following spring. They hiked the Tanner Trail to the point where his tripod had been found and left a small metal plaque inscribed with his name and the words, "Still exploring." His sister later told a local newspaper that the family had reviewed the photos recovered from his camera. "The last images were beautiful," she said. It looked like he was exactly where he wanted to be. The National Park Service still classifies Anderson's case as active but unsolved. Rangers reviewing the incident note that the Tanner Trail, though popular among experienced hikers, has claimed several lives over the decades. Its steep, loose switchbacks and exposure make it unforgiving of mistakes. A misstep near a rim or a slip on unstable rock can send a person into terrain so remote and hazardous that recovery is nearly impossible. Today, the stretch of canyon where Anderson vanished remains unchanged. Wind still sweeps through the sandstone corridors, and the Colorado still cuts its slow path below. Hikers pass the same ledges and overlooks, pausing to take photographs much like he did. Somewhere beyond those points, where the trail fades into the immensity of the canyon, the final moments of his trek remain unknown. The disappearance of Clare Dunn. The South Kaibab Trail is one of the steepest and most exposed routes into the Grand Canyon. It cuts down from the South Rim in a series of switchbacks and ridges, dropping nearly a mile in elevation before reaching the Colorado River. Hikers who attempt to travel from rim to river and back in a single day are warned repeatedly by rangers. The descent is easy, but the climb back can become deadly under the afternoon sunday. In April 2020, a 42-year-old woman named Clare Dunn set out to complete that challenge. She never returned. Dunn was an experienced hiker and outdoor enthusiast from Boulder, Colorado. She taught biology at a local high school and often spent weekends hiking or climbing throughout the Rocky Mountains. Friends said she was cautious and organized, known for meticulous planning and careful gear preparation. She had completed a rim-to-river hike 2 years earlier with a group, but this time she intended to go alone, starting at dawn from the South Kaibab Trail, following the river trail along the Colorado, then ascending back to the rim via the Bright Angel Trail. The route was about 17 miles, a difficult but achievable challenge for someone with her experience. On the 18th of April 2020, Clare checked into a small lodge near Grand Canyon Village. Surveillance footage captured her leaving just before sunrise, wearing a red windbreaker, black shorts, and trail shoes. She carried a lightweight pack with water, snacks, a filter, a headlamp, and a satellite messenger. At 5:47 a.m., a camera near the trailhead recorded her beginning the descent. Conditions were nearly ideal: cool temperatures at dawn, a forecast high in the mid-80 seconds on the canyon floor, and clear skies. Other hikers reported seeing her that morning. A couple from Phoenix remembered her passing them near Cedar Ridge, around 7:15 a.m., moving quickly and confidently. Another group spoke with her briefly at Skeleton Point about an hour later. They recalled her commenting on the quietness of the trail, likely due to pandemic travel restrictions. The last confirmed sighting came from a hiker named Daniel Holt, who saw her near the tip-off less than a mile from the river, around 9:40 a.m. She was taking photographs and appeared relaxed. After that, no one saw Clare again. Her family expected a message from her by early evening. When none came, her sister called the park dispatch office. Rangers found her car still parked near the South Kaibab trailhead the following morning. A standard overdue hiker search began immediately. Crews first focused on the main corridor trails, South Kaibab, River, and Bright Angel, but found no sign of her. On April 20, searchers discovered a small stack of items near a cairn about a quarter mile from the junction of the river and Tonto trails. The items, Clare's phone, map, water filter, and sunglasses, appeared carefully placed, not discarded. There were no footprints or signs of a struggle, and no obvious trail leading away. The cairn itself was unusual, suggesting she may have built it herself, possibly as a marker or signal. The find deepened the mystery. If she had encountered trouble, why leave essential gear behind? Rangers theorized she might have experienced disorientation from heat or dehydration, causing confusion and erratic behavior. Another possibility was that she had gone off trail in search of water or shade, leaving unnecessary weight behind. Yet searches of the surrounding area yielded nothing. The landscape itself posed enormous challenges. The Tonto Plateau is a maze of shallow ravines, unstable slopes, and hidden ledges. Temperatures near the river on April 20 climbed into the mid-90 seconds, enough to cause rapid dehydration. Without shade or a reliable water source, conditions could become life-threatening within hours. Rangers believe Clare might have tried to descend toward the river and become trapped in difficult terrain, or perhaps fallen into one of the many crevices that lie just beyond the trail's edge. Over the next 10 days, more than 150 miles of trail and terrain were searched by helicopter, foot patrols, and river teams. They checked established campsites, caves, and drainages. Dog teams were brought in, but failed to pick up a reliable scent. Rangers also floated sections of the Colorado River to look for signs of a fall, but nothing surfaced. On May 2, the search was scaled back. Officials described the case as highly unusual, largely because of the neatly stacked gear. Most missing hikers cling to essential items, even when disoriented or injured. Investigators considered the possibility that Clare had suffered from severe heat stress and attempted to lighten her load before continuing. Another theory suggested she had left the trail deliberately, though there was no evidence to support that. Several leads emerged in the months that followed. In September 2020, a river guide reported spotting a red piece of fabric high on a ledge near Pipe Creek, but a technical team later determined it was an old tarp. The following spring, hikers found a single trail shoe deep in a side canyon north of the Tonto Trail, but DNA testing was inconclusive. None of these discoveries brought investigators closer to solving the mystery. Clare's family visited the site in October 2021, placing a small stone marker beside the cairn where her belongings had been found. Her mother told a local newspaper she loved the canyon more than anywhere else. It was a place that felt infinite to her. Today, Clare's disappearance remains unsolved. Rangers still classify the case as open and continue periodic searches, especially after heavy rain or rockfall that might reveal hidden remains. Despite hundreds of hours of searching, no trace of her, not her clothing, not her pack, not a single bone has been found. The cairn remains where it was, a silent marker along the Tonto Plateau that most hikers pass without noticing. For those who know the story, it is a reminder of how quickly a prepared, experienced hiker can vanish in the canyon's vast and unforgiving terrain. The landscape offers no answers, only the enduring mystery of a journey that stopped without warning, somewhere between the trail and the river, in one of the most remote places on Earth. The Vanished Solo Trek of Mark Stratton. The Hermit Trail is one of the Grand Canyon's most rugged and demanding routes, a steep descent through layers of sandstone and shale that was first carved for mule trains in the early 1900s. Unlike the well-maintained corridor trails that funnel thousands of visitors safely in and out of the canyon each year, Hermit is lightly trafficked and far more unforgiving. Its switchbacks crumble in places, water is scarce for miles, and even experienced hikers are advised to proceed with caution. In the summer of 2013, a man named Mark Stratton set out alone on that trail. He never came back. Stratton was 39 years old, a geologist from Flagstaff, Arizona, known among friends for his endurance and love of the outdoors. He spent his weekends hiking remote canyons, often alone, and he kept detailed journals of his routes, conditions, and geological observations. He had hiked the Grand Canyon several times before, including solo trips to remote sections of the Tonto Plateau and the North Rim. This time, he planned a 3-day trek, down Hermit Trail to Hermit Creek, then onto the Colorado River, before looping back along the Tonto Trail and ascending via the Bright Angel Trail. He filed a backcountry permit and told his co-workers he would return by June 12. On the morning of June 9, Stratton left his apartment before dawn and drove to the South Rim. A park ranger later confirmed he signed the trail register at the Hermit Trailhead around 6:15 a.m. He carried a 50-litre pack, roughly 4 litres of water, a tent, and several days' worth of food. Temperatures that week were brutal, climbing above 105 degrees Fahrenheit on the canyon floor by mid-afternoon. Rangers had posted warnings about the heat, but Stratton's friends later said he was meticulous about preparation and accustomed to hiking in high temperatures. Other hikers saw him that morning. A couple descending ahead of him near Waldron Basin reported that he overtook them around 8 a.m., moving quickly and in good spirits. Later, a pair of backpackers resting near Santa Maria Spring said he stopped briefly to refill water and mentioned he was making great time. That would be the last confirmed sighting. When Stratton did not return home by June 12, a colleague reported him missing. Rangers located his car still parked at the Hermit Trail lot and immediately launched a search. The first day focused on the obvious route Hermit Trail, down to Hermit Creek, and the junction with the Tonto Trail. Searchers followed the path for miles, but found no trace of him. Campsites along Hermit Creek were empty, and there was no evidence anyone had camped at the usual backcountry sites. The second day brought the first clue, a trekking pole, partially buried in loose soil about 5 miles down the trail. The pole matched the brand and colour of Stratton's gear. 100 yards farther on, searchers found a torn map tucked into a rock crevice. It showed his planned route, with a pencil mark circling a junction near Boucher Creek, a potential side trip he had not mentioned in his permit application. Teams shifted their search to that area, rappelling into steep drainages and scanning ledges, but found nothing else. The terrain near Boucher Creek is among the most difficult in the canyon. Trails fade into dry washes, and the rock underfoot crumbles easily. Temperatures in the canyon bottom soared above 110 degrees Fahrenheit on June 11, conditions that could cause heat exhaustion within hours. Rangers speculated that Stratton might have attempted an off-trail shortcut or geological survey and become disoriented. Others believed he may have suffered dehydration and collapsed in a shaded alcove or drainage that searchers could not see from above. By the fourth day, the search expanded dramatically. Helicopters flew low along the Hermit and Boucher drainages, using infrared cameras to detect heat signatures. Ground teams covered more than 50 miles of trail, while technical climbers descended into remote side canyons. A boat crew patrolled the Colorado River downstream from Hermit Rapids in case Stratton had fallen into the water. Nothing surfaced. On June 15, a ranger patrol found a small cache of items, a hat, an empty water bottle, and a broken camera lens wedged in a boulder field roughly 7 miles from the trailhead. The items appeared weathered and had likely been there for several days. Nearby, a faint boot print matched Stratton's size and tread pattern, but the trail disappeared in a jumble of talus. Searchers combed the surrounding area without success. The official search continued for 10 days, involving more than 70 personnel, but yielded no additional evidence. On June 20, the National Park Service suspended active operations, listing Stratton as missing and presumed deceased. Officials noted the combination of extreme heat, challenging terrain, and off-trail travel as likely factors. In the official report, one ranger wrote, "The canyon can erase a person quickly. Even when we know where to look, it does not always give them back." Stratton's family organised several volunteer searches over the next 2 years. In 2015, a group of climbers explored an inaccessible chute west of Hermit Creek and found fragments of synthetic fabric that might have belonged to a backpack. Testing was inconclusive. Another volunteer team using drones in 2017 captured images of what appeared to be a boot sole on a ledge above Boucher Creek, but ground crews were unable to reach the location safely. His disappearance remains one of the most puzzling in Grand Canyon records. Stratton was experienced, well-prepared, and physically fit. He had left a detailed itinerary and appeared confident when last seen. Yet in one of the park's most heavily studied regions, not a single piece of definitive evidence, beyond a few scattered items, has ever been recovered. Today, hikers still follow the same switchbacks he walked on that June morning. They pause at Santa Maria Spring to rest, refill their bottles, and gaze into the vastness below the same views Stratton would have seen as he pressed deeper into the canyon. Somewhere beyond those bends, hidden by stone and distance, his journey ended in silence. The Hermit Trail remains what it has always been, a place of beauty and danger, where even the most prepared travelers can vanish without leaving a trace. The final steps of Laura McKenzie. The Tonto Trail is not one path, but a network of old routes etched into the plateau that divides the canyon's towering rims from the river far below. It winds for nearly 100 miles across desert scrub and fractured rock, often with no shade, no water, and no signs of human life. Rangers caution that it is not a place for beginners. It is a trail that demands patience, preparation, and a tolerance for silence. In October 2018, 3-year-old Laura McKenzie believed she was ready for it. She had hiked for decades across the American West. But somewhere along that trail, the landscape swallowed her, and no one has seen her since. Laura was a retired nurse from Eugene, Oregon. After leaving her job at a regional hospital, she spent much of her time traveling to national parks, hiking remote trails, and writing about them for a small outdoor blog she kept for friends and family. The Grand Canyon had always fascinated her, but she had only visited its rim before. In the fall of 2018, she decided to attempt a solo trek along a long section of the Tonto Trail from the Grandview Trailhead to Indian Garden, a multi-day hike that would cover nearly 30 miles through rugged terrain. She filed a backcountry permit with the Park Service and told her sister she expected to complete the hike in 4 days. She arrived at the South Rim on October 14, checked in at the Backcountry Information Center, and picked up a final weather update. Conditions were ideal, cool mornings, highs in the mid-80 seconds, and no storms in the forecast. On the morning of October 15, she set out from Grandview Trailhead with a 55-litre pack, carrying water, food, a stove, a satellite beacon, and a journal she used to record daily observations. A trail register entry at 7:11 a.m. marked her start. Several hikers encountered her that day. A pair descending the Grandview Trail recalled speaking with her around 9 a.m. She seemed cheerful, confident, and said she planned to camp near Cottonwood Creek that night. Later, another hiker reported seeing her sitting beneath a juniper tree near Horseshoe Mesa in the early afternoon, writing in a small notebook. She waved as he passed. That was the last confirmed sighting. When she did not check in by October 19, as planned, her sister contacted park authorities. Rangers located her car still parked at the trailhead and launched a search that evening. The first teams followed her intended route from Grandview toward the Tonto Trail, scanning for footprints, discarded gear, or signs of a campsite. They found none. On the second day of the search, October 20, a ranger team discovered 2 trekking poles leaning against a rock near a dry wash about 5 miles from Horseshoe Mesa. Beside them lay Laura's field journal. The last entry, dated October 16, described the weather and noted that she was making slower time than expected, but felt good and strong. There was no mention of distress. The discovery puzzled investigators. The site was slightly off the main trail, suggesting she had left it intentionally perhaps to rest or seek shade, but there were no signs she had camped there, and no footprints indicated which direction she had gone afterward. searchers fanned out in widening circles, covering drainages, ridges, and side canyons. Helicopters swept the area, and dog teams followed intermittent scent trails that faded quickly in the dry air. By October 22, the search expanded across a 40 square mile area. Teams rappelled into steep ravines and checked small caves known to provide shelter to stranded hikers. A boat crew patrolled the Colorado River below in case she had descended far off route. No new evidence appeared. The Tonto Plateau is deceptive terrain. From above, it appears flat and navigable, but once inside, it is a maze of shallow valleys, broken ledges, and dead ends. Water is scarce, and temperatures, though mild on the rim, can climb dramatically on the exposed plateau. Rangers theorize that Laura may have become disoriented after leaving the trail, possibly while searching for a water source, and collapsed in an area too difficult to reach. Another possibility was that she had fallen while attempting a shortcut toward the river. Without evidence, no theory could be confirmed. On October 24, searchers found another clue, a small camp stove and fuel canister wedged under a ledge about a mile from the journal site. The items were identified as hers, but there was no sign of a tent, sleeping bag, or pack. Rangers speculated that she might have abandoned some weight in an attempt to move more quickly, a common behavior among dehydrated or disoriented hikers. The official search continued for 10 days, involving more than 80 personnel and covering more than 150 miles of trail and side canyon terrain. On October 25, the operation was scaled back. The National Park Service listed Laura as missing and presumed deceased. A spokesperson noted, "Even experienced hikers can underestimate the complexity of the Tonto. Once you're off the trail, navigation becomes extremely difficult." Over the following months, volunteer search teams returned to the area. In early 2019, one group found a scrap of nylon fabric caught in a mesquite branch deep inside a narrow drainage. It was similar to the material of Laura's pack, but tests were inconclusive. Another team in 2020 used drones to survey inaccessible ledges and alcoves, but found nothing. Laura's family visited the canyon each October for several years after her disappearance. They placed a small plaque at Grandview Trailhead, engraved with her name and a line from one of her journal entries. "The canyon does not yield, it invites." Her sister told a local newspaper she respected this landscape. If she is still out there, she is part of it now. Today, hikers still walk the same trails Laura set out on that October morning. They pass the cairns, dry washes, and narrow ledges that mark the route she was last known to follow. Somewhere beyond those points, in a maze of rock and silence, the trail of footprints ends. No remains, no clothing, no sign of her camp have ever been found. Her disappearance is still classified as active, one of dozens in the park's history that remain unexplained. And like many others before and since, it serves as a quiet reminder that in the Grand Canyon, even the most experienced travelers can take a final step into a landscape that keeps its secrets. The Lost Hike of Nathan Perez. The confluence of the Little Colorado and Colorado Rivers is one of the most remote and striking locations in the Grand Canyon. Here, the turquoise waters of the Little Colorado merge with the deep green of the main river, creating a vivid seam between two ancient landscapes. The route to reach it is steep, long, and often unmarked, a journey undertaken only by those with skill, stamina, and experience. In March 2021, 3-year-old Nathan Perez set out to photograph that confluence during his spring break. He never came back. Nathan was a junior at Arizona State University, studying environmental science and photography. Friends described him as curious and determined, someone who often combined his academic fieldwork with long solo hikes into wilderness areas. He had visited the Grand Canyon before, but never ventured far below the rim. For his spring trip, he planned a 2-day hike starting from the Desert View area, descending a little-used route along the Beamer Trail and spending a night near the confluence before hiking out the following day. He told his roommates he would return by March 18. He arrived at the park on March 16, parking his silver sedan near Desert View Watchtower. A trail register entry at 6:42 a.m. confirmed he began his descent early. He carried a medium pack with a tent, 2 cameras, a water filter, and food for 2 days. He also carried a handheld GPS device, though it was not equipped with a satellite messenger function. Rangers later noted that weather conditions were favourable: clear skies, light winds, and daytime highs in the low 80 seconds. Several hikers saw him that first day. A pair descending ahead of him remembered him catching up and chatting briefly near Tanner Rapids. He mentioned his plan to camp near the confluence and photograph the sunset. Later, a rafting guide reported seeing a lone hiker moving east along the Beamer Trail around noon. Perez appeared in good condition and was carrying his gear. That was the last confirmed sighting. When he did not return by March 18, his roommates contacted park authorities. Rangers found his car still parked where he had left it. A search began that afternoon, starting along the Tanner Trail and extending downriver along the Beamer route. Teams looked for footprints, discarded gear, or signs of a campsite, but found nothing. Helicopters conducted aerial sweeps of the confluence area, but spotted no trace of him. On March 20, searchers discovered his camera tripod about a mile west of the confluence, set up on a ledge with its legs extended. Nearby, a partially full water bottle and a lens cap were wedged between rocks. There was no sign of a struggle or fall, and the surrounding soil showed no clear footprints. Rangers believed he had likely set up the tripod to take landscape shots before continuing on foot. The search expanded rapidly. Over the next several days, teams canvassed the riverbanks, drainages, and side canyons branching off the Beamer Trail. They rappelled into vertical drop-offs and scanned cliff ledges with binoculars. A river patrol crew floated a 15-mile stretch of the Colorado downstream in case he had fallen into the water. Nothing surfaced. A significant clue emerged on March 23. A rafting party spotted a DSLR camera wedged in a crevice near the confluence. It was later confirmed to be Perez's. The memory card contained dozens of photos taken that day, including several time-stamped at 4:17 p.m. The last image captured a dramatic view of the turquoise waters of the Little Colorado merging with the main river. Beyond that, there were no photos. Investigators concluded he likely vanished sometime after 4:30 p.m. Theories about what happened vary. One possibility is that Perez attempted to explore a nearby ridge or riverbank and fell into inaccessible terrain. The area is riddled with steep drop-offs, hidden fissures, and unstable slopes that can crumble beneath a hiker's weight. Another theory suggests he may have tried to get closer to the river for a low-angle photograph and slipped into the current. The confluence's swirling eddies and strong undertow make recovery extremely difficult. Rangers noted that if he had entered the water, his body could have been carried dozens of miles downstream before resurfacing, if it resurfaced at all. By March 28, the official search was scaled back. Over 120 personnel had participated, logging more than 300 search hours by air, land, and water. Dog teams were deployed along likely routes but were unable to track a continuous scent. Drones scanned inaccessible cliffs, and sonar was used on sections of the river, but neither yielded results. Perez's family organized several volunteer searches in the months that followed. In June 2021, a group of experienced climbers descended a technical route into a remote drainage east of the confluence and discovered a single hiking boot partially buried in silt. DNA testing was inconclusive. Another team, in 2022, used long-range cameras to survey hard-to-reach alcoves, but found no further evidence. His disappearance remains one of the most haunting in recent Grand Canyon history. Perez was young, healthy, and well-prepared. He left behind a detailed plan, and his final photographs showed no signs of distress. Yet somewhere in the short stretch between his tripod and the river's edge, he vanished without leaving a trace. Today, hikers and rafters still visit the confluence, drawn by its rare beauty. Many know nothing of the student who stood on its banks in March 2021 and never walked away. Others pause when they see the swirling waters and the unstable ledges, aware of how easily a single misstep can erase a person from the landscape. Nathan Perez's name remains on the National Park Service's list of active missing persons. His camera, with its final photograph of converging rivers, sits in an evidence locker, the last image he ever captured, and the only trace left of a journey that ended in silence. The vanishing photographer, Sarah McIntyre. The Escalante route is not a trail in the traditional sense. It is a rough, barely marked route that snakes through one of the most remote and unforgiving stretches of the Grand Canyon, connecting Tanner Rapids to the mouth of Hants Creek along the Colorado River's eastern corridor. Hikers who attempt it must scramble across steep scree slopes, navigate sheer drop-offs, and descend loose gullies where one wrong step can be fatal. It is a place for the highly experienced and well-prepared, a narrow ribbon of passage carved into ancient stone. In May 2015, a 6-year-old landscape photographer named Sarah McIntyre set out to hike that route alone. She was never seen again. Sarah was an accomplished outdoor photographer based in Portland, Oregon. Over the previous decade, her work had been featured in nature magazines and gallery exhibitions, celebrated for its stark portrayals of wilderness and solitude. She specialized in remote landscapes, often spending weeks at a time in rugged terrain to capture a single image. Friends described her as methodical and self-reliant. She carried a weathered field journal filled with meticulous notes about light angles, geological formations, and camera settings. The Grand Canyon had always been on her list of places to photograph in depth, and in the spring of 2015, she decided to undertake a solo expedition there. Her plan was ambitious but carefully plotted. She would start from the Tanner Trailhead near Desert View on May 6, descend to the river, then follow the Escalante route westward over 6 days, camping along the river corridor and photographing key vantage points at sunrise and sunset. From there, she intended to exit via the New Hants Trail on May 12. She filed a backcountry permit, informed friends of her itinerary, and packed accordingly a 55-litre backpack with food, water filtration equipment, lightweight camping gear, 2 cameras, and a satellite messenger device. Sarah signed the Tanner Trail register just after sunrise on May 6. A pair of hikers descending ahead of her recalled that she passed them near Cardenas Butte mid-morning, moving confidently with trekking poles and a heavy camera pack. Another hiker saw her that afternoon near Tanner Rapids, where she stopped briefly to photograph the river. That was the last confirmed sighting. When she failed to return by May 12, her family contacted park rangers. A search began the next day, focusing on the Tanner and Escalante corridors. Rangers located her car still parked at Desert View, confirming she had not exited by another route. By May 14, a helicopter sweep identified a possible campsite near Escalante Creek, a small tent pitched beside a dry wash, with a pair of boots neatly placed outside. A camera bag, cooking stove, and journal were inside, but there was no sign of Sarah. The campsite appeared undisturbed. Food remained sealed, and her tent was intact, suggesting she had not left in a hurry. The most recent journal entry, dated May 10, described extraordinary morning light and a plan to photograph a section of canyon rim she had scouted the previous evening. Investigators believed she left camp that morning to take photographs and never returned. Search teams spread out from the campsite in all directions. Ground crews followed faint tracks leading toward a steep gully descending to the river, but they vanished less than 200 meters from camp. Helicopters conducted low-level sweeps of the area, scanning ledges, boulder fields, and alcoves. Rope teams rappelled into vertical slots and narrow chutes. A boat crew patrolled the river downstream from Escalante Creek. Nothing was found. On May 16, a search team discovered a small tripod wedged between rocks near the edge of a 200-foot drop. The surrounding soil was disturbed, as if someone had slipped or fallen. There was no camera attached, and no evidence of a body below. Rangers rappelled into the ravine, but found only loose debris and scattered stones. The possibility that Sarah had fallen into the canyon was considered likely, but remained unproven. The Escalante route is notorious for its hazards. Parts of the trail require exposed traverses across steep slopes with sheer drops on either side. Loose talus and crumbling sandstone make footing treacherous, and in many places there are no cairns or markers to guide the way. Hikers can become disoriented within minutes, and a fall from some sections would send a person hundreds of feet into inaccessible terrain. Rangers believe that if Sarah did fall, her body may have been swept away by flash flooding or buried beneath shifting debris, complicating recovery efforts. The official search lasted 9 days and involved more than 70 personnel, including technical climbing specialists and canine units. Despite covering over 80 square miles by air and ground, searchers recovered no additional evidence beyond the tent, boots, and tripod. The satellite messenger she carried was never located. On May 20, the National Park Service suspended the active search, listing her as missing and presumed deceased. Over the following years, volunteer groups returned periodically to the area. In 2016, a private search team discovered a fragment of fabric, possibly from a backpack, lodged in a crevice several miles downstream from her last known location, but testing was inconclusive. Another team in 2018 conducted an extensive drone survey of inaccessible ledges, but found nothing of significance. Sarah's disappearance left a deep impression on those who knew her. Friends and fellow photographers organised an exhibition of her final work later that year, displaying prints from her last completed project in Utah's Canyonlands. At the entrance, they displayed a copy of her final journal entry. "The light here is not gentle, it reveals everything." Und Crate. Today, the place where her tent once stood remains unchanged, a quiet alcove beside a dry wash, where the wind moves through sparse desert shrubs and the sound of the river echoes far below. Hikers who pass through the Escalante route still speak of her case, often pausing at the gully where her tripod was found. For many, it serves as a stark reminder of how easily a single misstep can turn a planned journey into a mystery that endures for years. The National Park Service continues to classify Sarah McIntyre's disappearance as an open case. Her name remains on the agency's official list of missing persons, one among many whose stories are scattered across the canyon's vast expanse. The search reports note that the odds of recovery diminish sharply after the first 48 hours, but they also record that remains have surfaced decades later, uncovered by erosion or revealed by falling rock. It is possible, rangers say, that one day Sarah's final resting place will be found. Until then, all that remains is the silence of the canyon and a story frozen in time, a photographer's final expedition, unfinished beneath the desert sky. The Unsolved Mystery of David Langford. Deer Creek is one of the most secluded and hauntingly beautiful regions of the Grand Canyon, a remote area of narrow slot canyons, sheer red walls, and cascading water that seems out of place in such an arid land. The area is rarely visited compared to the main corridor trails. Getting there requires stamina, careful navigation, and a willingness to traverse terrain that offers no margin for error. In July 2016, 1-year-old David Langford, a veteran backpacker and frequent Grand Canyon explorer, set out alone to see Deer Creek Falls, one of the canyon's most hidden treasures. he never returned. Langford was a retired park ranger from New Mexico, someone who understood wilderness better than most. Over 3 decades, he had hiked nearly every major canyon in the American Southwest. He was deeply familiar with the Grand Canyon's hazards and had completed multiple solo treks there before. Friends said he was cautious and disciplined, a man who preferred order and routine. In the summer of 2016, he planned a challenging 6-day hike, starting from the Thunder River trailhead on the North Rim, descending through Surprise Valley to Deer Creek, spending 2 nights near the falls, then looping back north via the Esplanade route. He filed his permit weeks in advance, included detailed maps and waypoints, and told family he would check in by July 19. On July 13, Langford parked his white pickup truck at the remote trailhead and signed the backcountry register at 6:42 a.m. The weather that week was typical for midsummer, brutally hot in the canyon, with highs exceeding 105 degrees Fahrenheit, but otherwise clear and stable. Several hikers on the Thunder River Trail reported seeing him that day. One couple recalled chatting with him near the junction with Surprise Valley in the afternoon. He told them he was ahead of schedule and planned to camp near Deer Creek that evening. Another group, descending the following morning, saw a solitary figure matching his description far below, walking confidently along the trail toward the river. When Langford failed to return by July 19, his brother notified park authorities. Rangers located his truck still parked at the trailhead and began a search on July 20. The first crews followed his planned route toward Deer Creek. They found boot prints consistent with his footwear near Surprise Valley and a small fire ring at a known campsite above Deer Creek Falls. A nearby flat rock held a cooking stove and a partially used gas canister, both confirmed as his. But there was no sign of Langford himself. On July 21, searchers made a troubling discovery. Less than half a mile downstream from the campsite, they found his backpack leaning against a boulder near the canyon's edge. Inside were his map, water filter, journal, and most of his food. The pack appeared to have been set down deliberately rather than dropped. A faint set of footprints led away from the site toward a narrow ledge that skirted the rim of a deep gorge, a known but dangerous route used by some hikers to reach a series of remote waterfalls below. The footprints stopped abruptly at a point where the trail narrowed to less than 2 feet wide. Below was a vertical drop of more than 200 feet. Rangers immediately rappelled into the gorge, but there was no sign of a body, clothing, or broken gear. Search teams then combed the base of the cliff, inspected boulder piles, and used thermal cameras to scan shaded overhangs. They extended their search outward into side canyons, believing he might have attempted a detour or fallen into a tributary drainage. Nothing surfaced. By the 4th day of the search, more than 50 personnel were involved. Helicopters circled the area repeatedly, and river patrol boats scanned the Colorado below for any sign he had been swept downstream. Dog teams tracked faint scent trails along the rim, but lost them less than a mile from where his pack was found. On July 24, searchers discovered a weathered hiking pole wedged between 2 rocks near a shallow pool in Deer Creek Narrows. It matched the brand and model Langford carried, but no other evidence was present. Theories about his disappearance varied. One possibility is that he slipped from the ledge while scouting the lower falls and fell into terrain too deep and narrow to search effectively. Another theory suggests he may have suffered a medical emergency, such as heat stroke or dehydration, and collapsed somewhere off-trail. Rangers also considered the possibility that he descended into one of the many fissures and slots in the area, some of which extend hundreds of feet underground, and became trapped. On July 25, the National Park Service expanded the search perimeter dramatically, covering nearly 75 square miles of rugged terrain over the next 3 days. Teams used drones to scan inaccessible alcoves and rock shelves and lowered cameras into crevices. Still, there was no sign of Langford. On July 28, after 8 days, the official search was suspended. He was listed as Missing and presumed deceased. Langford's disappearance was especially perplexing given his level of experience. He had left detailed plans, followed his itinerary, and carried adequate gear. He was also known for his caution and aversion to unnecessary risks. If anyone could survive out there, it was David, one former colleague said. That's why none of this makes sense. His family and friends organised several volunteer search missions over the next 2 years. In 2017, a private team rappelled into a narrow side canyon several miles downstream and found a torn section of fabric, possibly from a hiking shirt, but tests were inconclusive. In 2018, a group of climbers discovered an old water bottle wedged in a rock fissure, but it could not be linked to him. None of these discoveries brought investigators closer to an answer. Today, the location of David Langford's final steps remains unknown. His pack, stove, and journal, still sealed in a weatherproof bag, are stored in evidence at Grand Canyon National Park headquarters. The journal's last entry, dated July 15, is brief. Deer Creek is beautiful. The water is cold. I'll try to reach the falls tomorrow. There is no indication of trouble, no hint that anything was wrong. The site where his pack was found is now marked on ranger maps as a caution area, a reminder of how quickly the canyon can turn against even the most seasoned hikers. Those who trek into Deer Creek often pause there, looking down into the gorge below, aware that somewhere in its depths lies the answer to a mystery that has endured for nearly a decade. Langford's name remains on the park's list of missing persons, one of dozens who stepped into the canyon and never returned, leaving behind only fragments of a story the desert refuses to finish. The Mystery of the Abandoned Camp, the Case of Emily Carter. The Boucher Trail is one of the most challenging and least forgiving paths in the Grand Canyon. It descends steeply from the south rim through a landscape of loose scree, narrow ledges, and unstable switchbacks, offering few signs or markers to guide the way. Even experienced hikers are warned to plan carefully, carry ample water, and be prepared for isolation. It is a trail that tests judgment and endurance, and one that, in May 2019, became the centre of one of the canyon's most unsettling disappearances. The case of Emily Carter remains a mystery not because of what was found, but because of what was left behind. Emily was 29 years old, an environmental science graduate student from Seattle, known for her love of the outdoors and a meticulous approach to hiking. She had spent years exploring remote trails across the Pacific Northwest and Southwest, often alone, documenting ecosystems and erosion patterns as part of her research. Friends described her as quiet but determined, someone who rarely deviated from a plan once she had made one. In the spring of 2019, she decided to spend part of her summer break hiking and camping in the Grand Canyon, a solo journey she hoped would allow her to photograph flora and geological formations for a dissertation project. Her plan, filed with the National Park Service in late April, was straightforward. She would descend the Boucher Trail from Hermit's Rest on May 10, spend 4 nights exploring the Tonto Plateau, and return on May 14. She informed her advisor and parents of her route and timeline. Weather conditions were favourable, dry and warm, with daytime highs in the mid-80 seconds, and she arrived at the South Rim on May 9. She purchased additional supplies at a nearby store, checked in with rangers, and spent the night at a campground near the trailhead. Early the next morning, she signed the backcountry register and began her descent. Several hikers reported seeing her that day. A pair of backpackers said she passed them mid-morning near Yuma Point, moving steadily and appearing in good spirits. Another group, camped near Boucher Creek, recalled speaking with her briefly in the late afternoon. She mentioned plans to set up camp nearby and hike toward the river the following morning. That was the last confirmed interaction. When Emily failed to return by May 14, park rangers initiated a standard overdue hiker search. A patrol team began down the Boucher Trail on May 15, following her planned route. It didn't take long to find her campsite, but it raised more questions than it answered. Roughly 6 miles from the trailhead, near a shaded alcove along Boucher Creek, searchers discovered her tent pitched neatly beside a cluster of rocks. Inside were her sleeping bag, camp stove, food supply, water filter, and journal. Nearby, her backpack leaned against a boulder, still zipped and fully packed. Her boots sat by the tent entrance, laces loosened, as if she had stepped out of them recently. A headlamp, cooking utensils, and a folded topographic map were laid out on a small ground sheet. Everything appeared orderly, untouched by wind or animals, but Emily was nowhere in sight. The campsite presented no signs of struggle, disarray, or departure. There were no footprints leading away, no drag marks, and no signs that she had attempted to move camp. Her gear suggested she had returned there recently, and perhaps intended to stay the night. Even her journal, open to a page dated May 12, offered little insight. The entry described a long day, exploring nearby washes and making notes on plant distribution. The last sentence read simply, "Tomorrow, I'll go farther down." Search teams fanned out from the campsite in all directions. They followed game trails, dry washes, and narrow side canyons that branched off the main route. Helicopters scanned the area from above, using thermal imaging to detect heat signatures in the desert floor. A boat crew patrolled the Colorado River downstream from where the Boucher Trail meets the water. Yet, there was no trace of Emily. On the third day of the search, rangers discovered a pair of trekking poles about a mile from the campsite, leaning against a rock near a steep descent. The placement appeared deliberate, as if they had been left there temporarily. Beyond that point, however, no further evidence was found. Teams rappelled into nearby gullies and searched beneath overhangs. They lowered cameras into narrow fissures and dry wells. All efforts came up empty. Investigators considered several theories. One was that Emily had wandered from camp to explore the surrounding area and suffered a fall or medical emergency. Another was that she attempted a descent to the river and became trapped in a section of terrain too remote to search effectively. A third theory, though less likely, was that she had chosen to leave intentionally, perhaps attempting an off-trail route back to the rim. Yet the state of her camp with essential gear left behind made that explanation difficult to accept. The official search lasted 11 days, involving more than 90 personnel and covering more than 100 square miles. Search dogs, aerial reconnaissance, and technical climbing teams were deployed. Despite the scale of the effort, nothing beyond the abandoned campsite and trekking poles was ever recovered. On May 26, the National Park Service suspended active operations, and Emily Carter was officially listed as missing and presumed deceased. Crew. Over the next 2 years, her family and friends organised several independent searches. In 2020, a volunteer team discovered a torn section of synthetic fabric lodged in a crevice about 2 miles downstream from the campsite, but forensic analysis could not conclusively link it to Emily. Another search in 2021 focused on a series of narrow ravines accessible only by rope. That effort, too, yielded no results. The mystery of her disappearance remains unsolved. What makes it unusual is not just the lack of evidence, but the presence of so much a fully intact camp, carefully arranged and undisturbed, as if the occupant had simply stepped away for a moment and never returned. Rangers who worked the case have described it as one of the strangest they have encountered. "It's as if she evaporated," one search coordinator said. "Everything was there except her." Today, hikers who pass through Boucher Creek sometimes stumble upon the clearing where her tent once stood. It is unmarked, but those familiar with the story recognize it immediately, a quiet patch of earth surrounded by red walls and thorny mesquite. The canyon remains silent on what happened there. Whether Emily slipped into an unseen ravine, fell victim to the heat, or met some other fate remains a mystery. All that is certain is that she walked away from a perfectly ordered camp and into a landscape that has kept its secret ever since. The Vanished Adventurer, the Case of Thomas Reed. The rim-to-rim hike is one of the most demanding feats a hiker can attempt in the Grand Canyon. It begins on one rim, descends nearly a vertical mile to the Colorado River, climbs back up to the opposite rim, and then reverses the journey, all in less than 24 hours. The distance is roughly 42 miles, with extreme temperature changes, brutal elevation shifts, and stretches of exposed terrain where water is scarce. Every year, a handful of ultra-endurance athletes and seasoned hikers complete it. Others never finish. In October 2022, a 3-4-year-old backpacker named Thomas Reed attempted the challenge. He vanished partway through, leaving behind a single digital clue, a location signal from his smartwatch that abruptly went dark deep inside a side canyon. Thomas was not new to high-endurance hiking. A former Army medic from Colorado Springs, he had spent the previous decade pushing his physical limits in remote wilderness areas. He ran ultramarathons, summited peaks in the Rockies, and completed long-distance through hikes across the Southwest. Friends described him as disciplined and focused, someone who approached endurance hiking as both a physical and mental test. The Grand Canyon's rim-to-rim-to-rim route had been on his list for years. In the fall of 2022, he decided to try it solo, carrying minimal gear and aiming to complete the trek in under 20 hours. He arrived at the South Rim on the evening of October 13, checked in at a small lodge, and spent the night reviewing weather reports and pacing plans. Conditions were favorable: daytime highs near 80 degrees Fahrenheit on the rim, mid-90 seconds inside the canyon, and clear skies. At 3:47 a.m. on October 14, he left from the South Kaibab trailhead carrying a small running vest with hydration bladders, energy gels, a headlamp, a GPS unit, and a smartwatch synced to a satellite tracking app. His route was typical for ultralight hikers: descend South Kaibab to the river, cross the Black Bridge, climb to the North Rim via the North Kaibab Trail, and then reverse the journey back to the South Rim. The first half of his trek went smoothly. Tracking data from his smartwatch showed he reached Phantom Ranch before sunrise and continued steadily up the canyon's north side. At 10:18 a.m., he checked in with a fellow hiker near Roaring Springs, saying he was ahead of schedule and feeling strong. By 12:42 p.m., his location ping showed him near the North Rim, almost exactly on pace. That was the last confirmed contact anyone had with him. When Thomas failed to return by the following morning, park rangers initiated a search. His vehicle remained at the trailhead, and his satellite tracker had stopped transmitting at 1:19 p.m. on October 14. The last signal placed him roughly 3 miles below the North Rim, near a rugged side canyon branching off from the main trail. Rangers began their search in that area, descending from both the rim and from Phantom Ranch below. On the second day of the search, a helicopter crew spotted what appeared to be a water bottle wedged into a crevice near the location of the last GPS signal. Ground teams confirmed it belonged to Thomas, but there were no footprints or additional signs nearby. Searchers theorized that he might have left the trail, either intentionally or accidentally, and descended into the side canyon. The terrain there is steep and unstable, composed of loose rock and narrow ledges that drop abruptly into deep slots. Over the next several days, the search intensified. More than 80 personnel joined the operation, including technical rescue specialists and canine units. Teams rappelled into vertical chutes, explored drainages branching off the side canyon, and used infrared cameras during nighttime flights. A river patrol scoured the Colorado downstream in case he had been swept into a tributary. Despite these efforts, no trace of him was found. One possible clue emerged on October 19. A search team discovered a torn section of lightweight fabric caught on a mesquite branch near a 200-foot drop-off about half a mile from the last known GPS point. The fabric matched the type used in ultralight jackets, but analysis could not confirm it belonged to Thomas. The discovery fueled speculation that he may have slipped while attempting a shortcut or scouting a route and fallen into an inaccessible area below. Theories about his disappearance remain speculative. Some rangers believe he may have ventured off-trail in search of water or shade and become disoriented. Others think he might have attempted to descend into the side canyon for a more direct route back to the river, misjudging the difficulty and falling. There is also the possibility that he experienced a sudden medical emergency heat stroke, dehydration, or cardiac failure and collapsed somewhere hidden from view. The lack of evidence makes every scenario plausible and none certain. By October 22, after 8 days of searching, the National Park Service scaled back operations. Over 120 square miles had been surveyed by foot, air, and drone. More than 300 search hours had been logged, yet beyond the water bottle, a scrap of fabric, and a silent GPS signal, no evidence of Thomas Reed had been recovered. He was officially listed as missing and presumed deceased. In the months that followed, his family and volunteers organized additional search missions. In spring 2023, a private group of climbers descended into a remote section of the side canyon using advanced rope systems, but found nothing. Another team in fall 2023 deployed drones equipped with high-resolution cameras and thermal sensors, but no new evidence emerged. What makes the case so haunting is the precision with which Thomas documented his journey and how suddenly that trail of data ends. Every step of his hike up to that final GPS ping is accounted for. There are no signs of distress in the pace or location data. His last known movement was steady and on course. Then, within minutes, everything stopped. Today, hikers attempting the rim-to-rim-to-rim route pass near the section of canyon where he disappeared. Most never realize they are within sight of one of the park's enduring mysteries. Others pause when they reach the junction near his last recorded location, peering down into the steep side canyon that swallows sound and light. Somewhere in that maze of stone and shadow, Thomas Reed's journey came to an end. Whether he slipped, collapsed, or chose a path from which there was no return, no one can say. His name remains on the National Park Service's active missing persons list. His smartwatch, frozen on a single coordinate deep in the canyon's interior, remains the last trace of a trek that was supposed to push his limits, but instead became one of the park's most perplexing unsolved cases. The Grand Canyon has claimed many who underestimated its vastness. But Thomas Reed was not among them. He planned, prepared, and moved with purpose, and yet, somewhere between one step and the next, the desert claimed his trail forever. The disappearance of Julia Harper Lost. In the Lava Falls corridor. The Lava Falls area of the Grand Canyon is unlike any other part of the park. Formed by ancient volcanic activity, it is a landscape of jagged basalt flows, fractured lava fields, and steep, unstable slopes that rise abruptly from the Colorado River. Trails are scarce, and many of the routes that exist are little more than cairn-marked scrambles over loose rock and blackened ridgelines. It is an unforgiving terrain where GPS signals often fail. Landmarks shift with every season, and a single wrong turn can lead deep into labyrinthine canyons. It was here, in September 2021, that 8-year-old Julia Harper vanished without a trace. Julia was an outdoor guide from Santa Fe, New Mexico, known among friends and clients for her methodical approach to backcountry travel. She had led expeditions in Utah's desert wilderness and guided rafting trips along the Colorado River. She was cautious and detail-oriented, someone who double-checked weather forecasts, carried redundant navigation tools, and planned contingencies for every trip. But she also had a deep curiosity for remote, unmarked routes, the kind that demanded route-finding skills and rewarded patience. The Lava Falls corridor, with its challenging terrain and rarely travelled paths, had long been on her list. Her plan was to spend 5 days exploring the area, starting from Tuck-Up Trail and following an unmarked route that skirted the upper rim before descending toward the river near Lava Falls Rapid, one of the most powerful rapids on the Colorado. From there, she intended to traverse a series of volcanic drainages and exit near Whitmore Wash. It was an ambitious route, one that required careful planning and self-sufficiency. Julia shared her itinerary with 2 close friends and filed a backcountry permit with the National Park Service. She planned to return by September 14. Julia was last seen on the morning of September 10. A rafting party unloading near Lava Falls spotted her on the rim above the rapid, scanning the terrain with a map and compass. They later described her as calm and focused, carrying a medium-sized pack and appearing well prepared. At 2:36 p.m. that same day, she sent a text message via a satellite device to a friend. Moving slower than planned. Strange weather rolling in. Might camp higher. That was the last communication anyone received from her. When she failed to exit by September 14, her friends alerted authorities. Rangers began their search 2 days later, starting from the Tuck-Up trailhead and following her planned route. Her vehicle was still parked at the trailhead, and a review of the permit and message logs confirmed her intended path. The first major clue surfaced on September 16, when a helicopter crew spotted a bright orange ground sheet near a volcanic ridge roughly 4 miles from the rim. On the ground, searchers found a small Camp Julia's tent, sleeping bag, stove, and food supply, all intact. Her pack was missing, suggesting she had left camp for a side hike or scouting trip. A search radius was established around the campsite. Teams spread out along likely routes toward the river and through adjacent lava drainages. They located several boot prints leading west toward a steep, boulder-strewn slope, but lost the trail less than a mile later. The terrain in that area was chaotic, a tangle of loose volcanic rock, dry wash channels, and vertical drop-offs that concealed sightlines. Helicopters and drones struggled to spot anything in the maze of shadows. On September 17, searchers found a torn map fragment lodged against a boulder about a mile from the campsite. It appeared to have been torn from the navigation booklet Julia carried. Nearby, a small piece of red nylon, possibly from her rain jacket, was snagged on desert brush. These were the only physical traces of her beyond the abandoned camp. Theories about what happened to Julia vary widely. One possibility is that she attempted to scout a descent route toward the river and slipped on the unstable basalt, falling into one of the many deep fissures and crevices that riddled the area. Another suggests she may have been caught in a sudden storm. Weather records show that thunderstorms swept through the canyon on the afternoon of September 10, producing localized flash floods and dangerous conditions on steep slopes. If she had been near a drainage during the storm, she could have been swept into an inaccessible ravine or buried beneath debris. Search efforts intensified over the following week. Teams rappelled into slot canyons, scanned sheer volcanic faces with binoculars, and used thermal imaging equipment to detect possible heat signatures in the rugged terrain. A river patrol team surveyed the stretch of the Colorado below Lava Falls, in case she had fallen into the water and been carried downstream. Despite these efforts, no sign of Julia was found. By September 23, more than 100 personnel had participated in the search, covering over 60 square miles of terrain by foot, air, and drone. The operation was one of the most complex in recent years due to the geological nature of the search area. The volcanic formations create thousands of hiding places, one ranger explained. It's possible for a person to disappear within a few yards of a trail and never be seen again. The search officially concluded on September 25. Julia Harper was listed as missing and presumed deceased. Her disappearance remains one of the most puzzling in Grand Canyon history because so little evidence exists. There were no signs of a major fall, no discarded gear, and no trace of her beyond a torn map and a scrap of fabric. Even her satellite device was never recovered. Over the following year, volunteer search teams continued to comb the lava falls corridor. In 2022, a group of climbers found a water bottle wedged deep in a crack near a side drainage, roughly 2 miles from her last known location. But there was no way to confirm whether it belonged to her. Another team conducted a drone survey of the volcanic slopes in early 2023, but found nothing of significance. Today, hikers who pass through the lava falls area often pause near the ridge where her final camp was found. The landscape appears unchanged, the same jagged black rock, the same sweeping view of the river far below. For many, the mystery of Julia Harper is a sobering reminder of the canyon's power to erase all traces of those who enter it. The terrain she sought to explore may now hold the only answers to what happened. Her final message, "Strange weather rolling in," is preserved in the case file, a small detail that hints at forces beyond her control. Whether it was the weather, the landscape, or an unseen accident that ended her journey, no one knows. Somewhere within that maze of ancient lava, Julia Harper vanished, and the canyon, as it has done so many times before, kept the rest of the story to itself. The phantom signal, the disappearance of Daniel Holt. Horseshoe Mesa rises from the Grand Canyon like a lonely plateau, isolated and windswept, its flat top ringed by steep cliffs and broken stone. Hikers who venture there describe it as quiet in a way that feels unnatural, the air still, the sound swallowed by distance, the remains of century-old copper mines scattered among twisted junipers. It is a place of solitude, and in May 2020, it became the setting for one of the canyon's most puzzling disappearances, a case defined not by silence, but by a signal that refused to stop. Daniel Holt, 46, was a software engineer from Denver and an experienced solo hiker. He had spent years exploring remote trails across the Southwest, combining his love of technology with wilderness travel. Friends said he was careful and methodical, the kind of person who checked weather reports twice and plotted water sources to the meter. His habit of carrying a GPS beacon on every trip had become part of his hiking identity. Horseshoe Mesa, with its mix of history and remoteness, had fascinated him for years. In spring 2020, he decided to see it for himself. On May 19, Holt parked his vehicle at the Grandview trailhead and began the steep descent just after sunrise. His plan was simple: hike down the Grandview Trail, spend the night near the eastern rim of Horseshoe Mesa, explore the old mine shafts scattered across it, and return the following afternoon. He carried a light pack, satellite communicator, water filter, and small tent. Weather that day was ideal: mild temperatures, clear skies, and calm winds. Several hikers saw him on the trail that morning. A group descending ahead of him recalled that he paused to photograph rock layers near Coconino Saddle. Later, another pair saw him moving steadily near Page Springs. At 1:42 p.m., he sent a satellite text to a friend. He had reached the mesa, set up camp, and was heading out to explore. That was the last direct contact. When Holt failed to return by May 20, his friend reported him overdue. Rangers located his car still at the trailhead and began searching the next morning. They quickly found signs of his presence footprints near the mesa's eastern edge, an empty water bottle, and faint tracks leading toward a steep slope. What puzzled them most was his GPS tracker. It was still active, transmitting regular location updates from an area roughly a quarter mile away from the campsite. Searchers focused on the signal. For nearly 2 days it kept pinging from the same spot, deep on the mesa's eastern flank. Rangers believed he might be trapped or injured. On May 22, a technical team rappelled down to the coordinates and found the device resting alone on a rocky ledge, still transmitting. Holt was nowhere to be seen. The situation only grew stranger. The ledge was difficult to reach on foot and offered no clear path beyond it. The tracker's location suggested it had been placed or dropped there deliberately, yet there were no signs of a fall, no gear, and no footprints leading away. Teams expanded the search outward, combing ravines, drainages, and talus slopes below. The following day brought another clue. About half a mile northeast of where the GPS had been found, a trekking pole was wedged in a rock crevice along a steep gully. It matched the brand Holt carried, but there was no evidence of a fall nearby. Aerial teams followed the drainage for several miles, with no result. Investigators debated what had happened. One possibility was that Holt had fallen while attempting a descent below the mesa, leaving his GPS behind either accidentally or on purpose. Another theory suggested he had intentionally placed the tracker to mark a location before continuing on. A more unusual idea proposed that the device might have been thrown or dropped from above, meaning Holt could have fallen elsewhere entirely. The search effort grew massive. Over 50 square miles were searched by helicopter and ground teams. K9 units were brought in, but lost the scent near the ledge. Drones equipped with infrared sensors scanned shaded alcoves and slot canyons. River patrols searched the Colorado below. Despite these efforts, no trace of Holt emerged, no clothing, gear, or human remains. The persistent signal remained the most baffling element. Its steady transmissions suggested it had remained functional and undisturbed long after Holt vanished. But how it ended up on a ledge far from any established trail, and why nothing else was nearby, remained unexplained. After 8 days and nearly 400 hours of combined search time, the National Park Service suspended operations on May 27. The final report described the disappearance as unresolved. Aside from the tracker and a single trekking pole, nothing belonging to Holt had been found. Volunteers continued the search over the next 2 years. In 2021, a private group discovered a strip of nylon webbing near a dry wash several miles away, but it could not be linked to Holt. Another team used high-resolution drones to scan inaccessible cliffs, again without result. Horseshoe Mesa has since become a place of quiet speculation among hikers and rangers. Those who pass near its eastern rim often stop to look out over the vast landscape below a maze of shadowed gullies and fractured rock where Holt likely vanished. Some believe he fell into one of the many fissures that split the mesa and remains hidden in terrain too remote to reach. Others suspect he deliberately left the GPS as a marker before attempting a dangerous descent. A few wonder if the signal itself, so reliable and constant, was an accident, a piece of equipment dislodged in a fall, transmitting its location long after its owner was gone. The GPS device, recovered in perfect working order, now sits in evidence storage at Grand Canyon headquarters. It is a reminder of the puzzle, at the heart of the case, a signal without a source, pointing to a man who vanished without explanation. Holt's disappearance is often cited as one of the strangest in the park's history. He was well prepared, experienced, and equipped with technology specifically meant to prevent such outcome. Yet somewhere between his last message and the moment the tracker came to rest on that ledge, he slipped out of view, leaving behind only a set of coordinates and questions that still have no answers. Today, the canyon remains silent on his fate. Horseshoe Mesa, with its flat top and steep edges, has seen many disappearances over the years, but few as confounding as this one. In a landscape shaped by time and erosion, where stone swallows evidence and distance distorts perspective, Daniel Holt's story endures as an unsolved riddle, one man, one device, and a final signal that led nowhere. The Canyon That Took Two. The dual disappearance of Matthew and Erin Clark. The Nankoweap Trail is one of the most isolated routes in the Grand Canyon, steep, exposed, and relentless. It follows the contours of a rugged escarpment, plunging nearly 6,000 feet from the North Rim to the Colorado River, with no water sources, little shade, and long stretches without a single cairn or signpost. Rangers warn hikers that it is not a trail for the inexperienced. Yet in May 2018, Matthew and Erin Clark, a married couple with years of backcountry experience, set out along Nankoweap on what was meant to be a week-long hiking trip. Neither of them ever returned. Matthew, 42, was a high school science teacher from Prescott, Arizona. Erin, 39, was a wildlife biologist with the U.S. Forest Service. They had spent much of their marriage exploring remote trails together, often choosing routes that challenged their endurance and navigational skills. In the spring of 2018, they planned an ambitious trek, a 7-day journey beginning at the North Rim, descending the Nankoweap Trail to the river, exploring a section of the canyon near Quaggant Creek, and returning along a cross-canyon route that would bring them back to their starting point. They arrived at the North Rim on May 10, checked in with park rangers, and picked up their backcountry permit. Friends later recalled that they were excited but cautious. They had done extensive research on the trail and prepared carefully. They carried a GPS unit, 2 satellite communicators, a 4-season tent, water filtration equipment, and food for 9 days. They also planned to cache water at a midway point during their return trip. They told family they would check in via satellite message by May 18. The couple began their hike on May 11. 2 other hikers descending the same route reported seeing them that afternoon near Marion Point, roughly 7 miles from the trailhead. They appeared in good condition and said they planned to camp near Tilted Mesa that night. Another group, rafting the Colorado near the Nankoweap Delta 2 days later, believed they saw 2 hikers moving along the trail high above the river, possibly Matthew and Erin, though they were too far away to confirm. After that, no one reported seeing them again. When May 18 came and went with no check-in, family members contacted park authorities. Rangers began searching the trail on May 19, starting from the North Rim and following the couple's planned route. Early the next day, a helicopter crew spotted a tent pitched on a bench above Nankoweap Creek. Ground teams reached the site and confirmed it was theirs. Inside were sleeping bags, cooking gear, food, and 2 journals. Outside, 2 pairs of boots were placed side by side near the tent's entrance. The scene was orderly, with no signs of a struggle or sudden departure, but Matthew and Erin were gone. From that point on, the search grew stranger. A few hundred yards from the tent, searchers found a small food cache buried under rocks, exactly as the couple had planned, but it had not been touched. Farther downstream, near the confluence of Nankoweap Creek and the Colorado River, searchers discovered a pair of trekking poles and a wide-brimmed hat believed to belong to Erin. Beyond that, there was nothing, no footprints, no clothing, no discarded gear. Search efforts intensified over the next week. Teams scoured the steep switchbacks of the Nankoweap Trail, the canyon floor, and the surrounding drainages. Helicopters scanned ledges and alcoves along the cliffs, while river patrol crews searched for evidence that they might have entered the water. Dog teams attempted to track their scent, but were unable to follow it beyond the immediate area of the tent. Despite more than 300 hours of coordinated searching across 80 square miles, no trace of the couple was found. Investigators considered several theories. One possibility was that they had attempted to descend a side canyon and become trapped or injured in an inaccessible area. Another theory was that they had gone to fetch water from the Colorado and been swept away by the current. Spring runoff in 2018 was unusually strong, and the river was running high and fast during the week they disappeared. Yet, If they had fallen into the water, searchers expected at least some evidence, gear, clothing, or bodies to eventually surface. None did. Some searchers noted that the placement of the boots suggested the couple might have left camp barefoot or in lighter shoes, perhaps to explore nearby terrain. Others speculated they had gone to scout a route toward Quaggant Creek and never returned. The journals found in their tent offered little help. The final entry, dated May 13, described the difficult heat and noted they planned to explore lower ground tomorrow. It was the last recorded sign of their intentions. After 10 days, the official search was scaled back. Rangers continued periodic aerial sweeps for several weeks, but the canyon revealed nothing more. Matthew and Erin Clark were listed as missing and presumed deceased. Their disappearance joined a small but haunting list of cases in which 2 people vanished simultaneously in the Grand Canyon, a phenomenon rare enough that search teams treat such incidents differently, often assuming a shared fate. Volunteers continued searching for years. In 2019, a private group located a torn piece of nylon backpack fabric about 3 miles downstream from the campsite, but testing was inconclusive. In 2021, a hiker found a weathered boot sole along the riverbank near Lava Canyon, more than 20 miles away. It was too degraded to identify. None of these discoveries brought investigators closer to answers. Today, the site of the Clarks' last known camp remains much as they left it, a clearing above Nankoweap Creek, shaded by pinyon and juniper, overlooking the vast sweep of the canyon below. Hikers sometimes stop there, aware of the story, and stand silently where 2 people once pitched their tent and then vanished. The disappearance of Matthew and Erin Clark is remembered as one of the most perplexing dual vanishings in Grand Canyon history. Every piece of evidence suggests they were prepared, cautious, and following their plan. And yet, somewhere between their final journal entry and the edge of the canyon, they disappeared as completely as if the desert had swallowed them whole. The canyon has a way of erasing stories. It absorbs sound, swallows evidence, and holds its secrets beneath layers of stone and shadow. For the families of Matthew and Erin, the unanswered questions remain: how 2 experienced hikers could leave a perfectly ordered camp and never return. Somewhere out there, in the silence of Nankoweap, the canyon holds the answer, but as it has so many times before, it chooses not to give it up. The Grand Canyon remains one of the most breathtaking and unforgiving places on Earth, a landscape that inspires awe, yet holds on tightly to its secrets. Each of these disappearances is more than just an unsolved mystery. They are reminders of how easily the vastness of nature can erase even the most prepared among us. And while search teams continue to look and families continue to hope, the canyon stays silent, revealing nothing about where these hikers went or what truly happened to them. If you found this journey into the unknown as haunting as we did, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. There are many more stories waiting to be uncovered, stories of vanished travelers, hidden clues, and questions that may never be answered. Join us as we continue exploring the mysteries the Grand Canyon refuses to let go.